Welcome back. Michael Patrick, Shiels radio stations across the state of Michigan. The fur was flying yesterday. In fact, the New York Post, thanks to Tony Cuthbert here, he loves the New York Post. The late city final was party bashers. Rivals tear each other and the Democratic Party apart in a nasty debate, and it shows a Bernie Sanders with a Fidel Castro hat on and boxing gloves, Elizabeth Warren with arrows, and Mayor Bloomberg has a knife, a shiv in his hand, and Joe Biden has a baseball bat in his hand. Wowee. That's what went on yesterday, and that's Dennis Muchmore here from the Honigman firm and Oakland University, and he was Governor Snyder's chief of staff. He's on an AT&T microphone, raring to go here about yesterday's debate. Nice to see you.
Yeah, can you imagine that these folks want to say that they're going to bring a calming influence into the White House?
Well,
I thought, boy, if you played into Donald Trump's hands any more than these people are doing, I don't know how they could do it.
Oakland University leaders don't just meet expectations, they shatter them. And you can discover your inner leader, whether you end up being president of the United States or not, at Oakland University. Learn more at oakland.edu/future students. And a guy who spends a lot of time with the future, current, and past students, Dave Dulio, director of the Center of Civic Engagement at Oakland University, professor in the political science department. And there was nothing very civil about that debate yesterday, was there?
There certainly wasn't. It was a big food fight down there in Charleston.
I know we like that, and it gets our adrenaline going, and it's sort of funny to see these dignified people raising their hands and saying "pick me" and all talking at one time like a Greek chorus. It seemed at one stage, and the moderators are being criticized there, including Gayle King and Nora O'Donnell, for losing control. Would you give them criticism for that too?
That's one of the main takeaways from last night, was the fact that the CBS moderators couldn't keep control of what was supposed to be was billed as a debate, and it turned into, at times, a simple shouting match. And I think they absolutely deserve criticism.
Well, was it Joe Biden who finally said, "Is that how we do this then? What we have to do is talk on top of everyone and talk over the allotted time." He seemed to complain about the rules more than anybody.
He did, and when you complain about the rules, it's never a good look.
Nah.
You sort of have to deal with it. Everybody's facing the same situation, and it's another instance where the vice president, I think, had a misstep.
To me, it seems like he's trying to rattle through his talking points, and he speaks a little too quickly, and he's sort of aggrieved all the time, which is not what I would have expected from him.
Well, I think you're right. He does. It seems like he's desperate to find something to hang his hat on, find something that resonates with Democratic primary voters, and it's as if he's trying to do that by, as you say, rattling through every talking point, every possible point he could make. Maybe like he's throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, and that's not going to work. He is not in a spot right now where he can rely on that strategy or where that strategy is going to work. He needs to have a really strong showing in South Carolina and build some momentum going into Super Tuesday, and that may not even be enough.
Dennis Muchmore, who were your winners and losers yesterday?
I just had the Democratic Party was the loser, I thought, in that, and the moderators to a certain extent, although I don't know how with that forum that they have and 7 people on stage, you're ever going to have a debate thing, but the moderators often lose control of these forums because they're not set up to be debates; they're set up to be attention getters. And the Democratic Party is responsible for its own screw up here. This whole election is going to drop right in their lap, and the way they're operating these debates and the qualifications for it are ridiculous.
Professor Dulio, Oakland University, what struck you? What are the snapshots that you woke up with this morning?
Well, I think there's a few.
Yeah.
One is that the arrows got pointed at Bernie Sanders last night compared to Michael Bloomberg in the last so-called debate. And I think Trustee Muchmore makes a good point about that. They're really not debates. They're forums for these candidates to answer questions. But Bernie Sanders took the brunt of the attacks last night, for good reason. He is clearly the front runner. he is on his way to the nomination, and the rest of the field is doing whatever they can to try and stop him. And who knows if it's going to work? It doesn't look like it. And I'll give you another one. Is you asked about winners and losers. I think the winner last night was Donald Trump.
Yeah, agreed.
Bernie Sanders didn't seem bothered at all by the attacks. And he at one point he reminded everybody, well, look at the national poll. He says, I'm in front of everybody. And even though he goes around saying, that Fidel Castro did some good things and everybody else is outraged by that, they try to link him with Vladimir Putin. They tell him he's an admirer of communist China. And he just keeps on trucking, doesn't he?
It seems. And I think we should be wary of general election matchup polls right now. And I say that because the Democrats, all of them, are really focused on Trump, right? That's their main opponent. And they'll squabble and argue with one another and to try to get this nomination, but they're all focused on Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't have an opponent yet. And I think that before we can start to handicap this race and see where we're at, we need to have a definitive one-on-one matchup. And we need to see how the Trump campaign is going to message against that singular opponent. So until then, I think we need to take those general election polls with a bit of a grain of salt.
If we were to talk 1 week from today, after the South Carolina primary and Super Tuesday, who's left standing? And it isn't Tom Steyer, I guess. Or is it?
He was. Let's be honest. He was never going to get the nomination, despite his, close to $200 million of spending of his own money.
That money fell out of Bloomberg's pocket yesterday when he was walking to the debate stage.
That's a good question. I think it depends. I look at these as an iterative process where you've got South Carolina, and that's going to reshuffle things a little bit. And then Super Tuesday, that'll have a bigger reshuffle. But at the same time, none of these other candidates seem to be even contemplating stepping aside. And it reminds me a bit of 2016, where there were a number of Republicans who had a claim or thought they had a claim to be able to stay in the race. And they never got out fast enough. So what those who want to stop Bernie Sanders have to hope for is a consolidation of candidates, and where they line up behind one another. And it doesn't seem to be the case right now. We may be almost as fractured have a Democratic Party a week from today as we do right now.
Stay with us if you don't mind. Dave Dulio, the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan, professor in the political science department there, and we're with Professor Dennis Muchmore, who's a trustee at Oakland University, and with the Honigman firm.
Well, I don't make that much money.
I see. Chief of staff he was for Governor Rick Snyder, and so we'll talk about the Cupid's victory at the South Beach Wine and Food Festival, too, but more on politics and some curious speculation coming out of yesterday's debates. MPS on Ash Wednesday.
And Donald Trump and the House and the Senate and some of the state houses will all go red, and then between gerrymandering and appointing judges for the next 20 or 30 years, we're going to live with this catastrophe.
Thank you.
Wow, Dave Dulio, maybe that was the best moment of Mayor Bloomberg yesterday in the Democrat debate. You're at Oakland University, political science. Thoughts on maybe a better performance this time from Mike Bloomberg?
It was certainly better than his last performance, but let's be honest about it. The bar was not very high for him to get over to reach better than last time. He was, it seemed unprepared and really struggled in the Nevada debate. And I think that hurt him moving forward. He can spend, and some estimates are he's spent nearly $500 million already on television and radio advertisements. And what's it getting him? The latest poll here in Michigan has him at about 13%, and that's not going to cut it to stop Bernie Sanders if that's what he wants to do.
That joke he tried to make in the middle of the debate yesterday didn't cut it either. If you noticed, he took a real left turn and circled back to what I thought was probably meant to be told at the beginning of the debate, where he said, "I'm surprised all the other contestants," he called them, up here, even showed up after how badly I beat them last time. And everybody just kind of stared like, okay.
Yeah, well, humor can be a really effective method of dealing with criticism, and being self-deprecating is a good thing for a lot of politicians, but you have to be able to pull it off, and I don't think he really did that last night.
What do you think of I'm just speculating. Bob Iger stepped down quickly yesterday as the CEO of Disney, 18 months, I think, before he was supposed to. He's going to be executive chair or something like that, and the man taking his place is a Michigan State graduate. But I just started to wonder why the hurry all of a sudden, and I wondered, I sort of fantasized in my mind about a Bloomberg-Iger ticket. And here's why I say that. Dennis Muchmore just fell over and spilled his coffee. But West Coast Iger, East Coast Bloomberg, and Iger's got international experience opening those parks in the Far East and Europe and so forth. And you'd get the Oprah support immediately. What do you think?
I'm with Trustee Muchmore, and I just fell off the chair. I think that's an interesting take, Michael Patrick. I think if Mike Bloomberg somehow gets the nomination, and it could be through a contested convention that it happens, but if he were to get that, I think he would be under some enormous pressure to choose a running mate that is more from that has some experience in at the federal level, and who has some kind of tie to Democratic Party politics more than he does.
Let's see. Elizabeth Warren. One thing that is constantly bothering me about her is when they ask her a question, she goes back to the beginning of time and starts to tell you from there. And I guess she was a teacher, and maybe that's why.
She remembers the beginning of time.
So, those are... She's a smart woman, right? There's no doubt about that. But I think candidates for office can fall into a trap when they try to tell voters everything they know about a subject.
Yeah.
And voters, and let me say this right off at the start, that some people think voters in the United States are stupid, and I don't buy that for 1 second. Voters in the United States are very rational. They are savvy. They don't need all of that information to figure out what's best for them. And I think they give candidates a pretty brief amount of time to get their attention. And when candidates like Elizabeth Warren start to tell you, as you say, the answer to this question from the beginning of time, voters lose them after a while, and they just sort of tune them out.
Now, the trustee Muchmore is a big fan of the delivery of Pete Buttigieg. Well, he's very concise, isn't he?
Yeah, I just think he's, I was commenting, Dave, that all of these people on that stage, well, with the exception of Globocar, I suppose, are all older people, let's put it that way, except for Mayor Pete, and he's the calmest one of the bunch. He's the only one who actually seems to have, a conversation with the people who are asking him a question. I just find it interesting that he's the one that's able to do that.
Well, and I think that was on display last night. Even in I called it a food fight in the shouting match that erupted at some points last night. He was the one who remained at least semi-calm, and he's very polished. He's under control, and I think that can matter to some voters.
Can you imagine Ronald Reagan raising his hand during a debate like that, and speaking over everyone and complaining about how much time he got and didn't?
He would have just waited until they came to him and said, "What do you think, Mr. Reagan?" And he would have come up with something, and everyone would have smiled and said, "That's my man,"
Speaking of food fights, Tony Cuthbert and I covered the South Beach Wine and Food Festival this weekend, and Cupid's, the little spot from around the corner.
The best it's called the Much More Country Club. I'll have
Is
you
that
know.
right?
That's
Okay.
what we used to call it in the governor's office, because I was the one who went there all the time, because we went out the back door and into their back door.
Oh, right.
So
Didn't
we
realize.
ate there all the time, and the governor loves their olive burger, which is what won the prize, and that's what he used to go in there to eat all the time. And that's the only restaurant I ever got him out to in Lansing, where it was someplace he was making a speech, obviously, but that was the only restaurant I could ever get him to go to.
Because he could go right across the alley.
Right across. Well, he could have an olive burger and go sit in the front, and talk to Russ when Russ was still alive.
Well, it was quite a coup for them. They beat some big competition there. It's very prestigious.
I guess, but there has to be some reason why a restaurant lasts, all these years in town. I mean, Dave and I and you and Tony have all, sampled a lot of fairs from around, and we keep going back to the same place, and the reason is because it's good.
Well, Oakland University was the first, I think, in the entire state to have a Chick-fil-A. So you got to give them that.
And it's booming. I mean, people love it.
Professor, thank you very much for the time, and obviously we'll keep in close touch, extended coverage and of the South Carolina primary and Super Tuesday. And then finally we get our turn here in Michigan. You can get your turn at Oakland University in Rochester. He's the director of the Center for Civic Engagement. And Dennis Muchmore from the Honigman firm with Michael Patrick Shiels. Tony Cuthbert has a hockey story you might not believe. Next.
How many times a day do we say the words, thank you? Sometimes for little reasons, like,
thanks, Mrs. K. The trumpet's fun.
Or,
hey, Coach. Thanks for the pointers.
But sometimes we say thanks for reasons that are big, like a billion times big. Last year, the Michigan Lottery contributed well over $1 billion to public education, an investment that supports our schools and our kids' futures. So thanks a billion for playing. The Michigan Lottery. For fun, for schools. Knowing your limits is always the best bet.
Pure Green Lawn and Tree Professionals is your local connection to high-quality, healthy, weed-free turf. Is your lawn looking its best? Does your current provider meet you to discuss options for improvement, or do they just try to sell you another service over the phone? Call 1-866-557-7873 to discuss program options or to schedule one of our experts to meet you. Call today, 703-1111, or visit puregreenlawn.net.